So the things that I contribute to, I'm hoping will still be having good effects for a couple hundred years or so. The best example is Wikipedia.
Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So first of all, I want to start off the show by saying, like, from listening to your story from other podcasts and like reading your stories, I feel like one of the things that really interesting is like, I think you really think differently. I know that you grew up in New Jersey, you studied like computer science, and then you have like interest in sci-fi, and then you mentioned about you went to Sunday school and they teach you to be, not taking as much like as you can take in terms of money wise. And then I feel like a lot of these philosophies are just fundamentally different than a lot of tech founders who are dominated by like, trying to get the biggest valuation and everything. So I would love to just learn more about like, what are something early on in your life that kind of shape you into who you are today?
Okay. The earliest major influence I can remember is Sunday school at the local synagogue in Morristown, New Jersey. Mr. and Mrs. Levin were the primary teachers. And I remember that in the equivalent of kindergarten there, they did teach us fundamentals, like treat people like you want to be treated, like know when enough is enough. And for that matter, there was the 9th commandment, which says that you should not bear false witness. And I was extremely impressionable then and throughout most of my life, to some extent even now. So that set my direction. Something that may have helped that I've only recently realized is that where I grew up in New Jersey, across the street from me was a junkyard. And we were living in a semi-industrial area with light industry like glass repair and so on. And I thought that was normal. And maybe that had an effect that I really have never fully understood.
I feel like you are one of the only, I guess, like celebrity founders that I feel like ever talk about their, Sunday school or like in their childhood, something actually make an impact in them. Because I feel like it's really thoughtful that like you still like keeping that as like your guideline throughout life. I just thought that was really, really cool.
Thanks. The deal is that the lessons from way back when stuck with me were internalized. And now that I've consciously remembered, that's even more effective.
So besides Ms. and Mrs. Levinson, who do you consider as on your personal board of advisors whenever you make a career move or anything?
Well, that was Mr. and Mrs. Levin. I've never had anything like a personal advisors in the sense that you're thinking. What I will do is in a specific area, I now have a lot of people who can help advise me in one area or another, like fighting disinformation or like supporting veterans and their families. I should have solicited and gotten more advice 20 years ago when it came to matters of law, but also communications and PR. I had the stereotypical engineer's prejudice against communications and PR, and as a result, I've badly blundered. Starting maybe 8 or more years ago, I decided I needed to atone for my sins of omission, and so now I get a lot of training and advice from communications people almost daily.
Interesting. Why do you think you need that PR or communication?
Well, sometimes it doesn't matter if you or people you support do good work. If no one knows about it, then it's not as effective as it should be. And unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits where people are good at their jobs, if they're genuinely helping people, then normally they're not good at telling people that they're doing a great job. And that leaves space for people who don't do a good job, but who are good at talking about it. That way, people from those nonprofits can suck a lot of resources away. The net result is a lot of nonprofit dollars are wasted, and that's bad.
Wow, that's so true. Like nowadays, everything is a media business. I chatted with one of my favorite designer the other week, and then she said the same thing. As a fashion brand, you really need to be on TikTok, on YouTube, on everything.
Yeah, the deal is that we're all responsible for our own perception, image, branding, whatever. And if you don't take responsibility for your own, someone else might, and they may not be honest about it.
Yeah, that's so true. So, what actions did you take to actually pick up the skill? You mentioned 8 years ago you started like some PR training. So, by that, what does that turn into action? Did you actually hire a person or?
Well, I don't want to claim that I've picked up any particular skill. My deal is that I'm not as terrible as I used to be, and that I have worked with a number of communications advisors to help me and help nonprofits get the word out more effectively, and to prevent problems where bad actors might make up something about what's going on. And that's been a real problem and continues to be a problem. Every day I talk to someone where I have to warn them to not let bad actors lie about them, because if a nonprofit is helping defend the country, we don't want bad guys to misrepresent that.
So going back a little bit, I know that you left Craigslist for a long time ago. Now you're primarily only focusing on like philanthropy. And I'm curious about like, so from like a successful founder to right now successfully doing philanthropy, what do you think is like one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at?
The skill where I need to improve is communications, because I'm a 1950 style nerd, so I'm the opposite of being naturally good at this stuff. It requires social skills, and part of the cliche is marginal social skills. So I'll never be good at comms and PR, but I keep working at it and working at it. An area where I've failed to date is, in 2000, I turned over any management involvement or decision making to other people at Craigslist. And at that point, I just went full-time into customer service. So I've had no role in any decision making at Craigslist for over 20 years, but I've done a poor job of communicating that. A couple of years ago, I retired from Craigslist because they don't need me anymore, and I need to focus on philanthropy. I haven't done a good job communicating that. So I just need to get better at that, and then I need to get better at that, but I get help, and I remind every group that I support that they need to get ready to defend themselves. And I'm asking them also to get ready to defend each other, because when you stand up for trustworthy communications, that exposes you to actual danger from some very bad people.
For sure. What is your day-to-day like now? Like philanthropy is so far away from someone in their 20s, which is where I'm at. So I'm curious about like what's like the day-to-day like for you.
My habit is in a way been the same for over 25 years. I'll tend to get up relatively early, and then I'll see what's going on in email, Twitter, and my feeds. And I'll respond to any customer service needs. And I'll just prod people to do what might need to be done. Sometimes I don't need to, because sometimes people give me the heads up about a major announcement coming up. And sometimes I need to remind people to remind me what's going on, because I forget things. And then I just keep doing that through the day. Well, I work as long as it takes. And in between, I'll be reading fiction, because I do read a great deal of it. And maybe I'll watch some TV. Oh, and I do remember to eat, although I may be doing too much of that. And that statement is true throughout my entire life.
I would ask, what do you eat? But that's like whenever question in the end. I'm curious about like, what does philanthropy mean? Like, I know that it's like people essentially donating money. For example, you donate like $20 million into the journalism school. And curious, like, I understand that like you need to do a lot of research on like figure out what organization is legit, and you need to figure out like, so that's like from a general like from like a regular person's perspective. So I'm curious, like, what kind of work does it take to do philanthropy?
Well, rewinding, my approach to philanthropy is to understand what I believe in and what are the urgent priorities of the day.
Mhm.
I find people who are really good at their job about doing something along these lines. I give them help, which is typically in the form of influence, help with communications, and cash, and generally do it with as few strings as possible. For example, I do ask them to work with other people in the same space, whatever that is. I do ask them to communicate better. I ask them to prepare to protect themselves and others. And the heaviest burden of all, I ask them to tolerate my sense of humor, which is really something I shouldn't ask of anyone because I know I'm not as funny as I think I am. But as I age, I try harder and harder to be funny, much to the dismay of everyone.
So I'm curious about, like, you mentioned a lot about like protecting yourself in these nonprofit organizations, I assume. So like, why do we need to protect ourselves if I work for in philanthropy?
Well, first, the organizations I support need to protect themselves. And now I'm arguing we need to protect each other because there are bad people whose job it is to make money through artificial or fake outrage.
Mm.
And now and then, some group I support will expose bad actors. Usually, the way the bad actors respond is with more and more in the way of falsehoods or disinformation. Usually, the bad guys are way better at lying than the good actors are about countering those lies. That's
Mm.
really true for me. I mean, if I'm trying to counter a bad actor, and even if I use logic and reason to debunk what they're saying, if they're good at it, and they usually are, they can just come up with more falsehoods in real time. So I'm helpless. That's why
Wow.
I get help.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, like, if you get help, like, I assume, do you like have due diligence team? I know that you are, when you started, you were just yourself, like, right? Like you just do that by
Yeah.
yourself. Like, curious, what does it look like now? Do you have a team or?
At this point, I have some skills to sense when I'm saying something stupid, and then I can stop myself from saying the stupid thing. But I do ask people sometimes to check out what I'm saying in case I'm saying anything that could be misinterpreted and used in a bad way. So I still do get help, and I only expect to be getting help as long as I live. After that, it's over.
I feel you. That's interesting. I mean, like, I feel like your life, it's still, you kind of gave yourself a full-time job to kind of do goods and then, read science fictions. Like, I feel like your day, it's still like a normal people's day. And like, I don't know, I want to say I'm shocking, but like, I feel like it's still like, it gave me a vision of like, if I really succeed big and then like what I should be doing, then like,
Well, the deal is that, again, Mr. and Mrs. Levin in Sunday school, they told us to know when enough is enough. And I don't have much of a need for an entourage, no need for a private plane. For that matter, I don't own a car. Um,
what?
Between public transportation and car services, like Lyft or Uber, I found that I wasn't driving. So I had a car, which was, I think at that point, about 17 years old. I gave it to some relatives, and maybe I'll get a car again someday, but I don't feel the need. I do indulge myself. Here's one area. I buy all the books I want to, but that means if I buy a book, I pretty much have to read it. That's actually, I can't remember that a few years ago I bought a book I didn't read because it was terrible and I couldn't return it, but that's roughly something like 1 in 1,000.
I'm amazed. Like, I feel like you really is like a kind of like a role model for people who actually want to succeed. Because I'm personally, I buy books whenever I want. I mean, I'm not a billionaire, nowhere close to a billionaire, but like I buy whatever book I want. And then I also don't like to, I don't know, like I'm not, I'm never interested in like fancy cars. Like, this car is like 20K and like 50K, I could not tell the difference. I think that's like such a good like role model to have. I'm curious, like I know that you started Craigslist a million years ago, and from that point, I think one thing I find really interesting was you moved to SF when you were around 41, right? Like, and then yeah, like it's so different than like people who are in their 20s starting companies. So I would love to like just learn more about what's going on in your life that at that point. And then I know that you started Craigslist because of other people help you when you moved. And tell us more about like the behind the scenes. I would love to
Okay.
know. Yeah.
Well, first, I wouldn't hold myself up as a role model for anyone. Yeah, that would be foolish on my part. But my deal is that, yeah, around age 40 or so, I realized that I needed big changes. Part of that is that I couldn't rationalize remaining at IBM anymore. Good company, but as a really technical guy with marginal social skills, I needed to get away from marketing at IBM and back to some kind of development role where I wouldn't have to, where I didn't think I'd have to exercise social skills. So I got a job offer at Charles Schwab. They were kind enough to move me across the country, and that worked for a while. My big contribution was telling people around the company, and this is in 93, 94, that, hey, here's the internet. Here's how we're going to do business someday. But in corporations, social skills are a survival skill, because when you have a company of, let's say, greater than 150 people, that's the Dunbar number. Once it's a large company, then there's hierarchies and factions and all that, and you got to navigate through that. And I was helpless. Fortunately, I was encouraged to leave, let's say, early 95, just as the dot-com bubble was starting. And my timing was accidentally perfect.
And then that's the point that you started Craigslist full time.
Yeah. Well, I started as a hobby then, but I figured I would try getting work in the emerging dot-com industry. And I made some mistakes and got things right. For example, my first contract job was at Bank of America, helping build home banking. And I haven't used Bank of America home banking now for minutes, but I still use it, and I use it a lot.
That's so cool. And I think what I find really fascinating is not only you started this business, right? Like, and then at that point you were doing some part-time jobs with Bank of America. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? So you were doing some part-time gig working, essentially.
Well, it was a full-time contract job. I did a number of small gigs around that time because sometimes somebody would just need a little code written. Although I haven't done any coding since 2000 or so, which makes me very sad.
I mean, like you mentioned, it's like a good timing. I'm sure good timing is a great thing, but I feel like, normally when you hear these stories, it's like the founder had to hustle a lot. And I know that you mentioned you started this email list. It's essentially a CC list. And then what happened? How did you turn that into something really huge? And then I feel like you probably didn't spend much on marketing. I think from your past interview, you didn't even spend money on marketing, right? So how does this thing started from a CC list with 250 people to, a global?
Briefly, because the history has a few highlights, but not a lot. Early 95, I decided I need to give back to the community who had helped me out so much, and I wanted to connect with people better. And so I started a simple CC list for events that included arts and technology. It grew word of mouth, and people started sending me more stuff to do, and that people started asking me to be added to my CC list. In the middle of 95, at about 240 addresses, I think, the CC list mechanism broke. It just couldn't be that long. So at that point, I had to use a listserv. Somebody offered me the use of Majordomo, but that meant I had to give a thing a name. I was going to call it SF Events, since I think it was still mostly events then, but people around me told me they already called what I had Craigslist. They told me I had inadvertently created a brand. Then they told me what a brand is, because I didn't know. And I realized they were right. With my name in the thing, it would be personal and quirky. And from that point, I just kept maintaining the list and responding to customer service needs. Maybe a year after that, I don't really know. I remember that, I'm a programmer. I can write code to turn emails from the list into web pages. So I had instant and free web publishing. And the lesson there is that whenever something was taking too much of my time, whenever something, I think if it took an hour or more per day, I would write some more code to automate some or all of the task. So I had more and more time to do things like customer service. And I kept at it for a total of a few years, 95 through 97. At the end of 97, I realized I was getting about 1 million page views per month, which is a lot for back then. Job posters wanted to pay me money for job ads, and volunteers wanted to help. So 98, it was a volunteer thing, didn't work. And at the end of 98, people approached me telling me I had to make it into a real company. They were right. So early 99, I had to make a decision. And this is the biggest single decision probably. Venture capitalists and bankers told me to do the usual Silicon Valley thing. They would throw lots of money at me, and that would require monetizing the site fully. But because Mr. and Mrs. Levin had taught me no one enough is enough, I decided to monetize in a minimal way, and that's worked. That created a business model of doing well by doing good. It's worked far in excess of my expectations. It's all very surreal, but this is not altruistic or pious or anything. That's just following through with stuff that I believed in. So I just kept on doing what felt right. The next milestone was about a year in. I was, CEO manager, and people helped me understand that as a manager, I kind of suck. It took me weeks, but I realized people were right. I got someone better than me to manage. I became a full-time customer service rep. Wasn't managing customer service. I was a customer service rep and stayed that way for around 15 years or so. But the deal is that the company kept on in this philosophy, in this approach, and that's worked out well.
I think what really fascinating, couple points, right? Like one thing is with no VC money, how do you scale up your company? Nowadays, all the startups are like, if I don't have like 50 million, I wouldn't be able to put it around the world. But like Craigslist does that organically. Curious, like, how do you build a team or like that culture to make it sustainable? And then we're not talking about this just happened for like 2 years and then later on some other people copy you and then, yeah.
I can't take much credit for that. During the years when I was running things, basically I just kept listening to people and did what made sense. Then I turned the CEO role and all decision-making over to Jim Buckmaster, and he maintained the approach. He opened Craigslist up to more cities and more countries. And, as a result, again, we've done well by doing good. Mm-hmm. The only marketing that ever happened was a mistake. We put some ads for job postings in a couple of HR magazines. It didn't do anything, didn't work. And so we stopped that. So I'm guessing we misspent, I would imagine, some hundreds of dollars. But in those first years, the only costs that I can remember incurring, again at first, was for a while, I was paying $35 a month for hosting costs.
That's really, really, I feel like how do you even run such a lean organization, even when you guys hire people? And I feel like the culture maintained the same. It's like really kind of magical because normally, when a new CEO come in, they would be really different than the original founder. And I found it really fascinating that I think after you hired someone, he still kind of have the same style with you, right? Like he could have just, I guess, take the VC money and then grow hugely. But
the deal is, I guess I chose well, got lucky.
I'm sure.
And the deal is that the direction, the architecture of Craigslist was set in the first few years. That's worked out pretty well. A lot of it has to do with, a couple of years ago, someone named Jessa Lingle, she's at Penn, and she wrote a book about Craigslist, and she pointed out that it's one of the few ungentrified sites left on the internet. I think it's called something like the People's Internet. And I love the metaphor because Craigslist is kind of like an ungentrified neighborhood. It has flaws, but people get along, people help each other out, everyone gets by, people are real neighbors, despite, the occasional problem. And if a developer comes by with bags of money, sometimes people say, not interested. That, by the way, applies to my philanthropy. It's ungentrified in the sense that I do see a need, for supporting the arts, ballet or whatever. But my focus is on the grassroots. What do people need so that we can live together successfully and people look out for each other? And that means helping people get fed. It means defending the country. And that's the opposite of gentrification. And that means that, I'll never be going to the Met Gala, I think, in New York, but I don't know what I would do if I was there.
I feel you. I mean, you would probably wear exactly this shirt to the Met Gala, assuming.
It would be something like that. This shirt is kind of colorful for me because it's a light brown. My favorite color, which I've never disclosed, is charcoal gray.
Wow. Yeah, like the hat you had on your LinkedIn profile picture. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Now and then I'll go nuts and wear a blue shirt, but it's usually gray, brown, black. Those are my colorful colors.
I mean, your home is kind of really colorful. I like the plan, and I like the red painting in the background, and then the Wikipedia flag, and it could have been dirtier. So
you're right. The painting is in tones of red, but those are muted, bashful colors, tones of red, and that's my preference. The room raider guy is apparently a friend of a friend, and I live in some dread of the room raider noticing how I'm doing this stuff.
For sure. I have a question I'm dying to ask. This is what I've been questioning myself since I discovered Craigslist. Why is Craigslist interface never changed? It looks exactly like 40 years ago, not 40, but like 20 years ago when I first see it.
When I put up a website the first time, I was thinking, I have no design skills, but I know how to keep things simple and fast. And for that matter, functional. I like to get right to the point. I want to get out of people's way and get something done. And that's the approach you see on the site. And as it turns out, for the most part, when people are looking to get something done on the net, like helping put food on the table, they want something simple, fast, and functional. And so those are pretty good design principles for everything. The only thing that comes close, as I recall, is there's Google and there's Wikipedia.
You are a big Wikipedia fan. I know that you gave a talk at Google. You mentioned you work with Google on some projects closely, and then you helped Wikipedia. What's your affiliation with them? And I feel like Wikipedia and Craigslist are very kind of similar, have the similar vibe, right? Wikipedia is also a nonprofit. I have a neighbor who worked there. I think she mentioned it was only 100 people, not even 100, maybe 70 something people work in Wikipedia when she worked there a couple of years ago.
I've worked very little with Google. It had to do with journalism ethics because the people I worked with and I are very interested in trustworthy journalism. Wikipedia is a much bigger factor in there. I say that Wikipedia is where facts go to live. So I've helped them out with, general operating funds. More importantly, I've helped them with projects focusing on preventing harassment directed against Wikipedia participants. Particularly, I'm helping counter the harassment directed against women editors. I'm helping them deal with information warfare. I've put some funding and help regarding getting more biographies of notable women in there. And nowadays, I'm working with a number of people trying to figure out how to do a better job with the biographies of living persons because the Wikipedia standards, their ethics regarding updating biographies are very, very strict for good reasons. And so it's hard to do that. But the theme is Wikipedia is where facts go to live. And, Craigslist will help you get through the day. But Wikipedia is for the ages. It's the first draft of history. And so it's a really big deal.
Like, I'm so fascinated by, like, I know Wikipedia don't even monetize, right? Like every year I got like on Wikipedia, it's like donate $5. And like, how is it possible? Because this is such a, everyone in the world is benefiting from this website. And then, yeah, they're like a nonprofit organization. And I don't even know if they can, every year their tagline is like, we're not going to survive if you don't donate $5. And then
Yeah.
I'm just like really like shocked by how the world works. Like there's so many tech companies that are so profitable, yet they're not really like creating that much value to like everyone in the world, right?
Regarding Wikipedia, there was an announcement last week that they're going to make arrangements with companies that if the company uses them a great deal, that there should be some funding involved. I don't really understand it, but that does make a lot of sense to me. And Wikipedia is a pure good. It's imperfect, but it's a great gift to the world, and we need to do what we can to help it out.
100%. I was just fear of like, if I mean, like I'm taking money from somewhere, like, you have to sacrifice the content a little bit, right? Like, I mean, I don't know, like, I don't know Wikipedia, or like, I don't know like how things works, but I assume if I like take money from somewhere, I would like want to probably return the favor to them. I don't know. I could be, well, I could get canceled for like saying this, but I don't know.
The deal is, bottom line is Wikipedia does a great deal for the world, and people should give back. That's assuming that they have the resources to do so. If you're a single mom with a couple kids and barely getting by, maybe working a couple jobs, I'd prefer to help you out. That's a part of the reason for the food security efforts I'm involved with. The deal is that hunger in America has been a big problem for a long time. The pandemic has made it much worse, and it's also made it far worse for sometimes veterans and their families. This pisses me off. That's why I've recently announced I'm working with some food organizations and have contributed, I think it's 25 million to that effect.
I know that you work with Girls Who Code and then a lot of other organizations. How do you pick which one you want to work with? And then by working with them, do you just mean like donating money, you're donating your own money, or like do you have to also raise money for them, or how does it work?
For the most part, with that group and others, I'm working with them to become more effective. And a lot of it has to do with communications, helping make contributions. I've actually spoken at a few Girls Who Code summer sessions. And now Reshma Sojani, who's a great champion for this matters, I'm working with her to support what she calls the Marshall Plan for Moms. Since the pandemic has affected working moms in a really big way, so we're trying to get moms some help, thinking in some ways how much my mom had to put up with when I was a kid. I mean, a lot of it was that she had to put up with me, which is a burden I wouldn't want to wish on anyone, because I wasn't exactly socialized properly. But the idea is that sometimes you put your money where your mouth is. Maybe that's a thing I learned growing up in New Jersey. You need to put your money where your mouth is. That's a big deal.
Like you mentioned about picking these organizations by, I'm curious, like, do they reach out to you? Do you go on the internet, search, oh, I think this is a biggest word problem, and then you search who like is like the like core organization in this area? How does it work?
It's a combination of both these days. Sometimes I hear about a group which does some real good, and then I'll reach out to them, and sometimes they reach out for me. The balance is pretty good these days. But like for the food security effort, it wasn't hard to do some reading. And as a result, I support groups like Feeding America and World Central Kitchen, DC Central Kitchen, groups like that.
How do you kind of like research if they're legit before you invest in them?
It's a collection of efforts. I can do some research online. I chat with a lot of people who are in the nonprofit world, and they'll often help me out. Finally, there's some protection from groups like great nonprofits and so on, but also for a nonprofit to get tax nonprofit status, the IRS subjects them to some scrutiny. So I combine all these together. I do expect to make some mistakes, but it's mostly because a group turns out to be ineffective, or sometimes, like when I initially do the research, they have leadership who's effective, but then they wind up working, well, then their most effective people leave the group and replaced with less effective leadership. You know, no matter what you do in the nonprofit world, you are running some risk, and I've accepted that and can see already a great deal of good being done in the world with lots more to come.
I'm curious about like, so we were talking about how Craigslist built a good culture, right? Like you mentioned a lot about your own philosophy. How do you communicate that into like people in the organization? Then similarly to like your current philanthropy work, you are communicating that to the society too, right? Like how do you communicate that culture?
I guess what happens is that people look at Craigslist, and that speaks to something. Then they talk to other people about what's going on in philanthropy. They may read articles or sometimes listen to podcasts, and those all work together. Then when they approach me, they see that I practice what I preach, and then we take it from there. It's not that hard. The problems, again, are when bad actors decide they can try to manufacture some outrage, even if they have to make things up. And this has happened a lot. And I just deal.
Are those money your own money? Like, do you have to invest out of your own pocket, or do you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm using a private foundation where it's all my own money, and then I make contributions to what they call donor advised funds. And that's the source of other funding. And that works out pretty well.
Because most other successful founders are like investing in startups, right? Like when you see nowadays, Angelus Republic, everyone is investing in startups. I think you are really like noble in a way that you only like invest in things that like doesn't give you, well, like it does give you return by like doing the goods to the world, right? But like
what you're talking about is just me following through with what I was taught, practicing what I preach, and just following through that way. Right now, since I live modestly and well below my means, it's fine to give away a lot. That feels like I'm doing the right thing for the world. It is satisfying. Sometimes there's problems, but for the most part, things are working out well, particularly in the time frames which I'm investing for. And again, by investing, I mean contributing to these nonprofits. My personal time frame is, let's say, 20 or 30 years. But also what I have in mind is the next 200 years. So the things that I contribute to, I'm hoping will still be having good effects for a couple hundred years or so. The best example is Wikipedia.
There's something really interesting about that. So I think when I was in grad school, I read an article about Jack Ma, and essentially Jack Ma was saying like giving people jobs that can like also contribute to the society, because that will, like I think it's really different from like donating to nonprofit. But on the other hand, it's, I don't know.
It is really important to do things which create good jobs. That is a high value. That is a genuinely good thing. And so I guess I've helped do that indirectly in some ways with Craigslist and its after effects. But again, creating jobs is a big deal. It's a really good thing to do. Better if the jobs are good, but it's hard to judge what jobs are good and what aren't. And so I don't do that.
I have a couple last questions. It's a 1 minute fire round. One thing is, what's your favorite book?
I don't try to answer that, since I've read over 5,000 books in my time.
Wow.
And it's just really hard to even try to do that. The bulk of my reading is science fiction and fantasy, but also mysteries, spy novels. But I just don't even try anymore to figure out favorites.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
That's a combination of my Sunday school teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Levin, but also Anton Shulsky, who is my history teacher in high school. He made sure we understood how important the Bill of Rights is, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and he made sure we understood how important trustworthy journalism is. As I say it, a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy. So Mr. and Mrs. Levin and Anton Shulsky.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
If I could, maybe Leonard Cohen, the singer and poet, although he's not doing many dinner parties these days.
What would you have in your dinner party? This is one specific question for you.
Well, I've been actually discussing that with friends, and the deal is that we would probably get takeout from one of the local places in Greenwich Village, maybe Thai food, maybe traditional Delhi food, maybe Chinese, Japanese, or Indian.
Where are you right now? I thought you were in Silicon Valley, or New Jersey.
I live part-time in San Francisco and live part-time in Greenwich Village in Manhattan.
Awesome. Both great places. I'm in the Bay Area, so where can we find you outside of work?
I don't know if I have an outside of work, but if you want to see me both doing my job but also having fun, my Twitter stream is at Craig Newmark. You'll see me doing nonprofit work disproportionately for Donors Choose to help teachers and their students, but you'll see me posting bird photos, you'll see me retweeting other people's bird photos, that kind of thing.
One last question. If you are starting Craigslist today, what would you do?
I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to, because I got lucky starting things at the dawn of the .com age, where things were easier and cheaper. And nowadays, if I had to start over, I would try to get myself a good programming job at a promising startup.
Awesome. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Hey, you take care and thanks. I appreciate it.